And so with that, I'm gonna let me move on to today's session. So the idea for today's session was, I know, and I'm just looking at the faces here, I know several of you are at that point when you're starting to graduate from your programs and transition into faculty roles, either postdocs or faculty positions. So first off, congratulations to all those of you who are graduating this year. I know it's been a brutal job market. As someone who graduated at the peak of the financial crisis, I used to think our job market was brutal, but you guys have clearly outshone us. And so, really huge kudos for making that transition, and best of luck. And then I know some of you aren't quite there yet, but you will be soon. And so we thought we'd do a session where we just talk about this kind of point of departure, moving from being a PhD student to having a faculty position in a different school, in a different department. So that's going to be the focus of today. As I said, we will do other sessions. I know some of you had questions that were posted that talked about job market, etc. We can talk about that, but we will talk about that more in sessions later. This is really about making this transition, okay? And so I'm going to kick it off by asking, I'm going to finally stop talking. I know you're waiting for that moment to come. And asking the question to starting us off with a general question to Denisa and Zeke. Denisa and Zeke, when you look back at when you made this transition from moving out of the PhD program and starting a faculty position, what is it that you know now that you wish, looking back, you had known at the point when you made that transition?
Well, thank you, Aseem, and thanks to all the students who are participating here today, and thanks to Samina also for organizing this with Aseem. And this question, all the questions are great. This is really a tricky question, but I'm happy to give you my 2 cents on it. So when I reflected back, I thought like, what I wish I known was that, being an assistant professor and then transitioning to other roles, associate professor in academia, there's all of this involves systematic effort and systematic effort on all three lines, meaning research, teaching, and being just a very good colleague, So I guess there's no break in between, and you really have to juggle through everything. It's a marathon. Sometimes it looks like a sprint. Okay, I will just send this paper out, and I'm gonna be fine, and then I can take a break. And I think like what matter most is that you have to be very systematic and to plan ahead, and to know that you have to, every 3 months you have to do something, send a paper, review something. There's no break in between. So you have to be very, very systematic about what you are doing. And it's very important to realize the synergies, at least in my case, the synergies between research and teaching. When I volunteer to teach some electives, I realized that every time I teach something new, I'm going to have to go in that direction a lot. So if there's no research behind it, it's not worth doing it. So that's one aspect of the synergy it's great if you can combine teaching with the research topics that you are doing. And sometimes it's come naturally, sometimes not, but you have to make that effort to really embark on topics that great. And the other aspect of synergy is also how much you can actually get done by organizing yourself, the teaching schedule and the research schedule in such a way that it gets you through this milestone that you have to reach in terms of publishing. So I probably underestimated the synergies between teaching and research. I think I might have underestimated the synergies between research and communicating to external stakeholders what we do in terms of research. There's a lot of pressure now to speak out, to have a public presence, and it could be because also social media is taking such a is playing such a big role these days. So I think the earlier you start, the better. Just to think about what you are doing, how you can communicate that to students and to other stakeholders. I think that will be hugely appreciated by any school, right? Um, Rather than just publishing and doing what we know to do best, which is many times research. And depending on the school, it depends on the balance between research and teaching. But I think this communication aspect is also very important and very appreciated by the schools. And last but not least, I would say that just being a nice colleague, being a good citizen um, is gonna matter a lot for your career from the very beginning. Get involved with the PhD students if your school has PhD students. Uh, Initiate some brown bags if your school doesn't have them ready, or organize them. Be present there for the seminar, and just reciprocate with everything you're getting from your colleagues. And you don't have to do big things in the beginning. No one is expecting you to play the most important role in the department, but just being there and showing your presence, showing that you are genuinely interested in what the others are doing. I mean, don't wait until year 3 or 4 to ask your colleague, hey, what are you working on? And um, let's have a chat about what you are doing. So small details that matter, that show you appreciate the community in which you have been welcomed for your job, that you and don't underestimate what senior people or people who have more teaching roles, if you have affiliate professors, don't underestimate what they are doing, because you can learn a lot. And you can learn a lot from teaching and from research. So I would say, if I'm to summarize, I didn't prepare this speech, Aseem, but if I am to summarize, is the systematic effort. There are no breaks in between, at least in the first 5 6 years of your um, career, especially when you transition from the PhD to being an assistant professor. It's a very relaxing summer, but as a matter of fact, just turn it into your advantage, because if you start early, it's going to be better for you. So systematic effort, synergies between research and teaching and communication, and being a nice colleague, being a good citizen.
Cool. Zeke?
Yeah, Denisa, that was very comprehensive. So let me just take a detour and thank Aseem and Samina. Everywhere I look, they're serving someone in our community. They're involved in like every committee. So I just really have a lot of respect for them and want to thank them. I just want to say two things. So the first one is, so I totally agree with the principle that getting that early start in research is important. I think that's not inconsistent with what I'm about to say, which is when you finish your PhD, celebrate. Congratulate yourself. Take a break. Go on a vacation. Rest. You have a long marathon ahead, and you should celebrate that. You should enjoy it. You should take a few weeks off. Right? Don't take the whole. Maybe you don't have to take 4 months off, but a few weeks is fine. You should do that. Prepare yourself. It's a wonderful milestone, and you'll have many years to figure out how to be an assistant professor. So that's the first thing. The other thing I'll say, and this is somewhat personal, but when I look back, what I wish I had known is how much of imposter syndrome I would feel in the first few months. And I know that not everybody feels that, but I had a very acute case of imposter syndrome. And it wasn't that I went in thinking I was badly trained or anything. And, maybe I went in with too much confidence. I don't know, but I was surprised. I remember the first weeks in my office, thinking that the dean was going to come in and say, you know, Zeke, there was a clerical error. That's why we hired you. And it turns out that we didn't really want you. Can we buy out your contract or something? Because I just felt like I didn't belong. I felt, you know, PhD students would come to me and and they'd ask me advice. And I was like, just 2 weeks ago, I was literally like you. Like, why are you asking me advice? Or a senior colleague would have asked me my opinion about something, or I would be at a seminar and just be sort of in awe of the brilliance of my senior colleagues. And it was very hard for me. Like, there were moments where I had to like shut my office door and just kind of calm down. And that was just difficult. And I think, you know, in the years since, I've realized that it's much more common, right? I also thought I'm the only one feeling this. And that might happen to you. And if it happens to you, at least know that it's common, that many of the faculty you really admire went through that. I would say some of what Denisa said holds the key to getting over that, which is it's easy to want to lock yourself in your office and think, well, I'm not going to share my work until it's perfect. I'm not going to talk to anyone until I have a perfectly formed thought, because I don't want to come across as stupid. So I just want to assure you that wherever you end up whether it was a postdoc or a faculty position, it was not a mistake. They did not hire you by mistake. They value you. They understand that you're not perfect and you're learning, but your opinions, your ideas are valuable. Your half-formed research ideas are good. You just need to get them out there. And so if you feel imposter syndrome in the way I did, resist the temptation to look inside. You have to put yourself out there, and like most things with time, you'll get over it. I did. You know, I've had a wonderful career, but it wasn't an easy start.
Thanks. I'm laughing because you know, when I started in my PhD as a faculty member, one of the first PhD students who came to talk to me to get advice was Zeke. And I remember sitting there saying, what the hell are you asking me for? I have no freaking clue what you're talking about. So you probably know all this stuff better than I do. So, and I mean, I'm glad Zeke's got over his imposter syndrome, but I still haven't. Samina, did you want to either chime in or ask the next question? Samina, you're muted.
Sorry, we only have till 12, correct? So I'm going to jump ahead and we're going to steamroll on, okay, to the next question, because I think Denisa and Zeke are doing a great job. So the second question is, what advice do you have for graduating PhD students on building their research pipeline? And we want to break this question into 2 parts, so feel free to address one or both parts, okay? And so the first is, what are your tips on how they should turn their dissertation into publications? And then the second is, how should they balance working on their dissertation versus or working on any other new projects? So any advice? Zeke, you want to start us off?
Sure. That's a great question. Whoever asked it, maybe many of you did. In some ways, I'm still figuring out how to balance and manage the portfolio. But let me perhaps share with you my mental model on managing a research agenda for what it's worth. So I think of it as provided I'm doing research that is good quality and somehow I'm interested in, which that's a whole separate conversation, but then it's just kind of in terms of managing the pipeline. I think of it as like I have this manufacturing image in my mind, and there's a manufacturing chain with three stages, right? Stage 1 is new ideas. Stage 2 is working papers. Stage 3 is papers that are with the journals. And then hopefully the output of that is that there's some journal that accepts your work, and then, you know, happy ending. So I think that for me, it's been about managing those 3 stages, and in particular, managing the transitions between those 3 stages. So I think Denisa, you know, made a good point that you have a clock ticking, and so you need to get things through there. So it helps to do some backward math to think like, well, how many things do I have to put through that manufacturing chain to obtain the outcome that I want? And there's really only 2 of those phases that you have control over, right? Once something's at a journal, you've lost all control. Whatever the reviewers are going to say, whatever reviewer 2 is going to say, too bad, you can't do anything about it. So the only thing you can do is control the rate at which new ideas become working papers and the rate at which working papers enter the journals. And then there's going to be some things will be kicked back. In other words, will be rejected from journal to working paper. And so you also, have to manage that. So I would say that it helps to be a little bit dispassionate early on, and almost like do some napkin mathematics, right? And think, well, how many projects do I want to get through by, say, 18 months before I have to go up for tenure? Because it takes about, say, 18 months at under optimistic circumstances for a paper from submission to acceptance, which means that 18 months before you're going to go up for tenure, all the work that will get you through tenure has to be at the journals. And so now that's a very indirect way to answer the question, but it's to say that there's going to be a certain amount of work that you think you can turn into papers from your dissertation, and then a certain amount of new work beyond that. And I think it helps early on to just kind of plan that out, right? And say, all right, so if I work at X rate, in the first 2 or 3 years, you're going to have to be producing a certain number of papers, new papers beyond what you have from your dissertation. You're going to have to be submitting them at a certain rate. And then you pretty quickly realize that what really kills you as an assistant professor is the time lag between idea and working paper and between working paper and submission, right? So if you get rejected, it hurts, it's horrible. But if you let 8 months go by before you pick up that paper again, that's going to kill you, right? If you have an idea and 2 years go by before you write a paper, that's going to kill you. And so I'm not discounting the emotional aspects of the job. I think you already know that I take them seriously, but it helps to just kind of plan that out. So I'll shut up now because I want to hear what Denisa has to say. But those would be the mechanics of how I would manage it.
Yeah, right. So, it's a very, very important and difficult question. And thanks, Zeke, for sharing some tips with us. I'm still learning. I guess when it comes to the dissertation and publication, well, it also depends on what type of dissertation you have, because if you have 3 essays, then you probably know that you want to publish these 3 papers and you have a certain direction for the papers. If you have just one big dissertation, which I think it's out of fashion now, I used to have one, then you need to split it up in papers, and that requires a lot of thinking. And I would say that going back to your advisor and your committee, because they know best what you did, is going to be very helpful. So don't leave your PhD without having that direction from them. Now, again, depending on where you go, you may be very valued for having a single author publication, or you may be valued just because you meet the numbers. And there's nothing wrong with any of these approaches. It really depends on where you go. And so that should dictate your strategy, because turning the dissertation into publication takes time, takes skills. So if you don't have to publish by yourself, then by all means don't publish. My first publication took a long time, and it was a solo author publication on something very new. It was very risky, and I don't advise anyone to go through that route. But then even if your job market paper was solo authored, I don't think there's a rule which says that it has to stay the same when you publish. So then you can turn to your committee or to whoever contributed the most, and you think it was, deserves that co-authorship position, and you can work with someone. Again, if we go back to the question on how to turn the dissertation into publications, hopefully you own the data on your dissertation and you have some latitude what you do with it. And you can invite other people to use that same data for other projects, and that can be very helpful. But in terms of just the first step, I think it's really very important to work with your advisors and see whether they should become co-authors or not, and just start from there. Because once you have you went through the process, you will learn, and you will be able to take on more projects or to speed up the process next time. Of course, there's always some random element, but once you do it the first time, then you'll know how to do it second time better. So that should be very, very helpful. And that's why it's important to co-author in the beginning, I believe. Now, I will also want to give another advice, which I think I learned it in the middle of my tenure clock, which is, learn to throw money at the problem. If you have a problem of data problem, don't be shy in spending all your research accounts, in begging your dean to give you more research money, because this will be actually very favorable to giving you money to buy data, to solve that robustness checks in the revision process, or if you need a new variable, it's something that you didn't have as a PhD student. Now is the time to ask for more. And I'm pretty sure that even if you negotiate a certain amount of research money with your dean, they will find ways to give you more. And just learn to outsource, because you're no longer just a PhD professor. You don't have a PhD student. You don't have to do everything by yourself. You can hire programmer. You can hire RAs. You can use all sorts of outsourcing websites there, organizations such as Upwork. So I would, if I'm to summarize, I would say throw money at the problem. Oh, you need to go through that thorny review process. Is there anything you can outsource or buy? By all means, don't be cheap. Just do it. Think about the long term. And I should confess, sometimes I don't even care. If they don't reimburse and I think it's something important, I spend money from my salary. It doesn't matter. And I had this situation when I show to the dean. I don't advise you to do that, but what I'm saying is I went to the dean and I say, hey, I spend that much. Are you willing to reimburse? Because look, this is going well, or it's going to be published. And no one said no to me. It's better to anticipate though, but just to give you an idea about how important this is.
Maybe I'll add one thing, and then I'm going to ask Aseem to jump in too, which is I really like Zeke's pipeline, manufacturing plant analogy, because I think that's ultimately what your CV will look like, right, over time. So what I think is really important is those work in progress that are the beginning stages of that pipeline. This ties into what Denisa said, of who the co-authors are, who you're choosing in that pipeline. Because one thing you need to do first is learn to say no. Not every idea and every co-author who approaches you is a good idea. All right. You want to build your research identity. So you want to work on projects with co-authors that complement what you are already trying to do. And so be really cognizant of who you choose to work with. And also, you want to complement one another, work well together. And some people don't work quickly. Some people work well in your style, whether, like, I work with deadlines. Some people don't work well that way. So maybe we're not good co-authors. So making really good choices about the input into that manufacturing, pipeline is I think really important. Aseem?
Thanks. I guess the one other thing I would echo, and I think this showed up in some of these earlier comments, I think we tend to underestimate the goodwill of the departments we join, right? At the point when you're trying to get a job, we're trying to judge you and we're trying to sort of decide whether we want to take you or not. But to Zeke's point earlier and to Denisa's point as well, once we've hired you, we really want you to succeed, right? I know this differs a little bit from department to department, and there's the hypothetical boogeyman department out there that is just out to judge you and throw you out. But in my experience, most departments really, really want to help you. Your colleagues really want to help you. They want to provide you with resources. They want to provide you with advice. And so you really want to, I think one of the key things, I think in looking back, I think I spent a lot of time alone in my office trying to figure stuff out in those early years, which I didn't need to. I had, you know, half a dozen really talented researchers down the road, down the corridor for me. And the more I talked to them, the more supported I felt and the more I was able to be productive. So don't feel like you're going to be judged by your department, but you're going to be judged 5-6 years later when you go up for tenure. It's not like everybody understands that you're trying to figure this out, and everybody is happy to help you make it to that hurdle. It's not like you have to do this on your own and then, you know, show up at the point when, you know, nobody knows you. In fact, that's not going to work well, because a lot of what drives tenure is how much people like you and not really how much, I mean, not that that's the only thing that matters, but it matters a great deal. Okay, I do want to keep us moving. So, you know, Denisa was mentioning earlier sort of the challenges of balancing teaching, service, all of these other things. So that's really the next question, which is really, how do we think about this portfolio of different, moving on from just research, how do we think about the portfolio of other activities? And in particular, let's start by focusing on teaching. So what are some tips, maybe starting with Zeke, since Denisa, you already talked about the synergies. What are some tips you would have? How should we think about teaching when you're just starting out, and then balancing that with research, but also just being a good teacher early on?
So the majority of your time should be spent on research, but after, you know, at the end of the day, like, we are professors, right? So, you know, I know that there's some differences of opinion about this, but I'll just give you mine. Teaching is important. Like, it really matters. Our students are paying a lot of money. They're putting a lot of trust in us. So I would say, you know, we owe it to our students to do the best we can. That does not mean that we spend the majority of our time on teaching. I believe actually there's great complementarity between research and teaching. But I would say, you know, care about it. I know that sounds like really, perhaps like, duh, I should care about it, but I don't think everybody does. And I'm not sure that's always the advice you're given, right? I think there is a school of thought of like, just wing the teaching, right? And improvise and focus all on. So I would say care about it. That doesn't mean spending inordinate amounts of time. One way, so throw money at it if you can. If you have a budget to have teaching assistants, throw money at it. And the other thing is, like, I think there's a pretty well understood norm in our field that, like, borrowing and stealing ideas for teaching is totally acceptable. And so, you know, find the person who taught the class right before you, and they'll, you know, 90% of people will give you all their slides, all their teaching notes, all, you know, and so just use that. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. That will save you a lot of money and time in you know, in your preparation. And I would say that the other thing is, psychologically, if teaching goes very badly at first, then it just kind of, it sort of never ends, right? You end up like redesigning your class every semester because it didn't go well, and you end up spending way more time over the long run. So I would say, if you have to err on the side of over investing a little bit on teaching, I would say do that. It doesn't mean you have to win a teaching award your first time teaching, but if it goes well, you'll feel better. Then you can kind of put teaching a bit on autopilot, meaning you don't have to re-prepare the class. You just make small tweaks every semester instead of major design changes. Those would be my tips. But I would say fundamentally, if you approach it with like care and concern for the students, it will be easier to do all those things because you'll do them the right way, so to speak. I'll stop there.
Denisa,
yeah, no, Zeke, I fully agree, and I cannot emphasize how important it is that you get that self-satisfaction, and it's going to help you both with research and self-esteem and then further teaching if you get it well in the beginning. So just invest a little bit of time. Just don't ignore it. Don't ignore the teaching aspect. So maybe you can spend some of your time now at your home institution to see, to attend some courses, observe how professors are teaching. I think it's going to be easy for you than just to go to the new institution and ask for help. Of course, they will help you, but it's your level of comfort. I think it's going to be easy if you go as a PhD student and ask your senior professor, hey, can I just sit in? You know, I got this great job and I want to see how you're teaching. So use this time to prepare, just to complement what Zeke said. And yeah, well, I guess that's what I wanted to say. That's what I wanted to add here.
Can I jump in, Aseem? So the best gift I received as a new faculty member was from Anita McGann. And I was at Boston University at the time. And Anita said, come sit in on my classes and I'm going to come visit your class. Now, I had a slight heart attack when I knew Anita was going to be sitting in on my class. But it was the best gift she could have given me because I got to observe her teaching an entire graduate class for an entire semester. I just sat in at the back of the room. And what a gift. I learned from a master teacher and she heard me teach. And I'll tell you, she actually advised that I have 3 different professors sit in on my class. It was very intimidating, but it was the best thing I did. One OB professor who sat in on my class said to me, Samina, why are you yelling at your students? And I'm like, am I yelling at my students? And he said, well, you're projecting as if you're yelling at them. You know, these rooms are acoustically designed. You can speak at a normal volume. And I realized that I sing, as I used to sing as a hobby. And so I'm just used to projecting. And he was like, no, it sounds a little like you're yelling. So that was no one would tell me that unless someone was visiting my class. The second gift I got was from my father, who was also a professor. And he could see that I was struggling with quantity versus quality. And when I was a new professor, I was making way too much material that I possibly could not cover in the time frame. And he really passed on 2 things to me. One was the students don't know what you don't tell them, meaning they're going to leave with the material you give them. And if you don't get through Y and Z and you only get through X, you know, that's okay. They don't know. But what really matters is that they really learned X and that you feel good that that's enough as long as they learned it well. And so he said, you know, no student ever complained about being let out early. And I'll never forget that one thing that my dad said. So quality over quantity and learn from others, both by observing them and having them observe you.
I do want to also, I mean, we've been talking about teaching. I do want to sort of talk, I know there were a couple of questions about service and how should, especially as your junior faculty, to what extent and how should you think about getting involved in service activities at your school in the profession more generally? I know, and so I want to, I'm actually going to start with Denisa this time. I know, Denisa, you were talking about being a good organizational citizen and participating. Other thoughts on service as a junior faculty?
Yeah, I guess it also depends on the school, but I think the common denominator would be that at any school they would expect you to do some sort of lighter work, and you should not volunteer to do more than you can carry, because that may hurt you as well. But in terms of let's say lighter work, what I mean by that is the brown bags, interaction with PhD students, research seminars. You can organize them, or you can just be an active participant and meet with all speakers, do participate in the hiring process, do volunteer to go through the hiring files if that's something that is expected at your institution, because this would be, let's say, easier things. And then try to be visible in a profession, organize symposia, panels, try to stay you know, close to research, usual research and teaching activities, and do not get involved if you're not being asked specifically to do any sort of committee work or that goes beyond this close circle of research and teaching, at least in the beginning. That would be my advice. If you have that luxury to choose, that's what I would choose.
Zeke?
Yeah, maybe not a lot to add. Everything Denisa said, plus Aseem, I want to reinforce something Aseem said. It's like your colleagues really want to help you, but it's also remarkable how they do pay attention to your contributions to the department. And that doesn't have to come just through formal committee service, but just things like if you have a seminar series, show up, you know, be an engaged participant in your seminars. You know, if there's a department meeting, you know, be there, participate, just do the little things that aren't necessarily formal assignments. That's part of your service, and I would say it's something that will be paid attention to, and you know, making a good impression in that first year or two is really going to make a difference. But I would say you don't have to do it instrumentally. It's not that you have to say, oh, I'm going to show up and ask this great question so that my department chair thinks I'm amazing. It's just kind of, if you're naturally interested in the life of the department, that will come through, and that's valuable.
And let me echo that. I think that's not just true for the department. I think it's true for the field, right? So I think, again, I think junior people tend to underestimate how much attention senior people pay to who's in the field, who's doing stuff, who's publishing, who's kind of active. And I don't think, at least in my experience, service is just a natural byproduct of that, right? Like, you don't need to go out there and look for, you know, extra opportunities to do service. You do the research. If you're attending conferences, if you're presenting, if you're engaged, sooner or later, people will ask you to review for journals. People will ask you to to help organize a PDW or be on the panel for a PDW or something, right? So I think as long as you're putting yourself out there and not hiding away in your office, and you're publishing and you're active in conferences, opportunities will arise for you to be, you know, engaged in journal reviewing, engaged in, you know, all kinds of ways. So just, it doesn't have to be, oh, I have to think about service separately from, and have a plan for service separate from my research or my teaching. I think it's just that you have to just make sure that you're out there talking to people in your field, attending the conferences, presenting your work, getting feedback, being active. Would be my. Samina, do you want to add something? Or
I'll just add that hopefully you're protected to some extent within your institution for the service you're asked to do. So usually it's hopefully something like running the seminar series, something that will tie back to your research. As far as the field, I agree with everything Aseem said, but I also think, you know, a lot of it will come back to you in the sense that, you know, they say it takes a village for someone to get tenure. And what we mean by that is the field, right? You have letter writers and mentors for life, even beyond tenure. And a lot of those relationships actually start to build through service. And that service can be research related. That's what I would suggest when you're junior faculty. So that way, it's, again, those synergies that Denisa talked about are there. And then later you can move on to other types of service. So I think, again, what you put in will come back to you. That's the upside of it all.